Escape Motions reached out to me recently to let me know they were running one of their tutorial competitions. One of the themes is summer memories, and I don't know about you, but personally I'm not quite sure what constitutes summer these days. Two of our warmest days were well into September. But I was out recently taking a few reference photos, and for me one of the images of late summer is when all the crops get cut and all the bales are in the fields. So I've been out taking a few reference pictures. And when I thought about the tutorial and the competition, it made me think of the way that I approach taking those reference photos and how I use them to help me with composition. And that gave me an idea to look at what we could potentially do with Rebelle, the features and functionalities within Rebelle that we could use to help somebody pull together a set of thumbnails, and to show you a way that you can maybe approach using reference photography in a slightly different way to work with a single photo, to take that photo in a way that's more zoomed out to begin with, and then to use some of the features in Rebelle to be able to come up with a number of different thumbnail compositions from that single photo. So in this video I'm going to show you a little bit about how you can use those features in Rebelle to create a set of thumbnails and hopefully provide some useful information for you. My name's Pete. Welcome to Basement Picasso. Before we start doing the thumbnails, there's a couple of things that I want to get set up. And the first one is using a grayscale color set. What we can see here is I've got the color set panel open, and this is a color set I tend to use for a lot of my images, but we want to make a simple 5 color grayscale for this. So what I'm going to do is open up the color set panel at the bottom, and I'm going to create a new color set, and then we're going to go into the color panel, and I want to make 5 colors. So the first one is going to be white, so select white and then go to add color. The next one I want is going to be a mid color, so about 50% grey, and I'll add that color. And then I want black, and I'll add that color. And then I want 2 in between, so I want a dark color that's somewhere between the mid and the black, but slightly closer to the black, and we'll add that. And then similarly I want a colour that's between the white and the mid, but slightly closer to white, and we'll add that. So that gives us 5 colours in the colour set. If we click on that and do show colour names, we can see we have these 5 colours. What I'm going to do is put them in order, so I can just click and drag to move these around. We'll put black at the bottom, and we'll put the darkest one next to it. So we've now got the 5 colour scale in order. And to make them easier to work with, what we can do is double click on those, and then we can just quickly rename them. So we'll call the first one white, we'll call the next one light, the next one mid, the next one dark, and the next one black. So that gives us the 5 tonal values that we want to work with today. And then the last thing I can do is go down to the new colour set, double click on that, and I'll call that thumbnail for my colour set. So that's now available. I can move that down. I can make the colour panel a little bit smaller, so it's going to be a bit more convenient to work with. So we've now got 5 colours and we can now pick these and paint with these as we need. So the next thing that I want to set up is a brush to use, and what I want to make sure is I'm using a brush that is relatively flat in tone. So I don't want something that's going to be very blendy, something that's going to have a lot of opacity in it. So a good candidate for this is within the Express oils, there's a dry knife, and that's a brush that will give you fairly good solid coverage, and we can pick these colours and you can see that by pressing down we get a good solid flat colour and we can paint over them. So I'm in the paint mode, and that then allows us to work in these colours and to build them up on top of each other without blending, so that we can keep these colours relatively distinct. I do want a little bit of the texture coming through, and there's a couple of things that I want to change with this because of the particular canvas I'm using. So what I'm going to do is take this brush, and if we right click on that, I can duplicate the brush preset, and we'll call this one thumb. This is the one we're going to use for our thumbnails. What I'm going to do is go to the brush creator panel, and there's 2 little adjustments I want to make to this. So the first one, so these are on the paint tab under paint texture contrast, and the first one I want to do is to set this to light texture, because for this particular texture that helps it pick the top surface rather than falling into the crevices, and that tends to work more effectively with this particular canvas. And I also want to reduce the texture contrast slightly, because for these thumbnails I don't want heavily textured paint coming through. I want most of it to be flat with just a very small hint of texture. So that's the 2 adjustments I want to make to that brush. That's going to be my thumbnail brush for this exercise, and what I want to do is then just save those changes into the brush. So that's now the default for that brush, and I can use that going forward. So the next thing that I want to do is to bring in my reference image. So I'll just click and drag and drop it on the reference image panel, and you can see that brings it in, and it's got a little cross on it to show that it's not being made visible. If we just click on that again, then that will open up the reference image. So we've now got the image that we can work with. Because the thumbnails that we're going to use today are going to be in grayscale, we're going to make use of the option in the reference picture panel here at the top to turn it into a grayscale. So that allows us to focus more on the tones and the shapes and not worry quite so much about the colours. So we'll make use of that quite a lot. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this reference window panel as the way to explore the composition. So there's a couple of things that we can do with this. And first of all, we can set the aspect ratio. So we can make it a very wide picture, and then we can use the mouse wheel, we can scroll in and start to explore the composition that way. And then I can use the right click on the mouse, and I can then move the picture within that aspect ratio. So I've got all the sort of composition tools that we want in terms of being able to change that aspect ratio, move the image around, zoom it in and out, and then start to look at what potentially makes a good composition within that particular image. Before I start the thumbnail, what I want to do is draw the border or the frame that I'm going to use. And there's a couple of different ways that I could do this. So if we pick the pencil tool and we pick black, then I could obviously just try and freehand it out and try and get something similar to what's there. I can make those lines straighter. If I hold down Shift, then we can draw in straight lines. That might be an option. What I could do is actually go over and measure the picture, so I could physically draw in the lines, measure them out, and then try and get a frame and an aspect ratio that is as close as I can possibly get. And that would get me the rough proportions, but what we really want to do is try and get the aspect ratio as close as possible. So what I'm going to do is show you a little trick that we can do. We bring the reference picture over on top of the canvas, and I'm going to hold down Shift so that I get straight lines, and I'm going to start just outside the reference picture, and then I'm going to draw a straight line that is slightly bigger than I need and effectively line that up with the edges of the picture within the reference box. So what we're getting is nice straight lines and lines that are going to give us an aspect ratio that now perfectly matches the reference image that we're going to use. To help me paint more quickly, I want to make sure that the paint strokes don't go outside the box that we've created. So there's a couple of ways that we can potentially do that. If we go to the lines layer and we go to the selection tool, pick the magic wand, we can then select that particular area. And that's one way that would allow us to then go to paint, and the paint strokes that we make are then going to be contained within that area. A second way that we can do it is if we go down to our shapes layer and we then go back to the fill tool. I'll pick my middle tone of the 5 and I'll fill that in. We've now got a shape on that bottom layer. I can get rid of the selection now with the magic wand and deselect that. And over on the shapes layer, what I could do is lock the transparency of that, and again that would then allow me to go and paint within that shape, and that would constrain the paint that I'm doing. But the way that I'm going to do it today is to use another technique, which is to go to the middle layer, the thumbnail layer, and if we right click on that, you'll see there's an option to make that a clipping mask. So if we click on that and then paint in that thumbnail layer, again what you'll see is the paint is constrained by the edge of the box, so we can paint quickly and freely without having to worry about it. But what that does allow us is, going forward, if we want to make an adjustment, if we click on the transform tool, you'll see that it has actually kept all the paint strokes, even the one that went outside the shape. And in the future, that gives us an option, if we wanted to maybe move the image around a little bit and adjust it. So it gives us more flexibility as we go forward. So that's the technique that I'm going to use today. Now that I've got everything set up to be able to paint, what I want to do is start with as large a brush as I can get away with. We want to focus on shapes, not lines, not drawing, not tones and blending. So I've got the brush, I've got it set to the paint mode, and what I'm going to work through is the 5 colours. We've got our midground. I'm going to start with dark and then white, and then do light and then dark. So we'll start with the black. And looking at the reference, what I want to do is just focus on what are the big shapes and try and block them in as much as I can. We're not doing any drawing, we don't want any lines, we don't want detail, we're just thinking about the big elements that make up the composition. So what you'll see is that some of these shapes that I'm putting in are a lot bigger than I'm going to want in the end. And one of the tricks with this is the way to get detail without using a small brush is to start by over painting some of the areas and then to come back in later and to carve them out with other colours. So you'll see these look slightly too big to begin with, but you'll see we come back and carve them into the shape that we want in a little bit. So here you can see just with the white we can start to do that and knock the size of that down a little bit. Similarly with this black line going across, that's much darker than the black line there, and we'll be able to remove that in a minute. So we want to focus on shapes and placements of shapes, no detail, no edges. We're not thinking about the millions of leaves or all these stalks of straw in the field. We just want to try and simplify this down to the interesting shape pattern that exists within this. So we've got the black, we've got white. What I'll now do is go to the light, and remember there's a lot more grayscale here than we have in this 5-colour palette. So what this is doing is forcing me to really think about how we can simplify these shapes down. And here again I'm using this colour to carve back into that other one to be able to give us a little bit more interest in terms of those shapes. It's okay to make the brush a bit bigger and smaller, but what you really want to do is avoid getting the brush too small too quickly. You want to try and keep it as large as possible as you work through it. So here you can see by using the other colour that we've got here that we can effectively carve back into that shape, and what we end up with is a thin black line, even though we never used a small brush. Once you get most of the basics down, so we've done the black, the white, the light, we can go in and do the dark and just bring through a little bit of the accents of these shapes. And obviously I'm doing this quite quickly in terms of the demonstration, and we'll probably speed some wee bits of this up so that you're not sitting watching this forever. But this, you can really take as much time as you want. I mean, the general idea is ultimately to try and make these as quick studies, so it's more important to do more of them than it is to do one well. What you want to end up with ultimately is this page covered in lots of little thumbnails. So once you've got the overall image started, then you can go back and start to refine it, bring some of the other colours in. Want to carve out these and make these shapes a bit more individual. And as you go through this process, one of the key things is to remember that you're not constrained by this reference image. This is something that you're looking at and working from, but you're perfectly entitled to change it. You can add things that aren't there. You can move things around, make them bigger or smaller, or you can choose what to leave out. So don't be concerned. Don't be afraid to edit the picture. Make the picture ultimately what you would like it to be. So in this case, the sorts of things we might do, we might make that middle tree slightly bigger so that we've got a slightly better pattern. It does feel like the image is a little bit over to the right hand side, so I might balance that by making this tree over here just a bit bigger, just to give a bit of visual weight. So these are the sorts of things that you can start to think about to turn this image into something you want to create. The other thing that you might want to think about once you get a bit further into the thumbnail is go back to your reference image and take it off grayscale. And what you might now start to feel is that you want to make a bit more adjustments to it. So you might see some bits that now in colour you think are actually a bit darker than you had previously, and actually that would work better if you maybe brought in, for example, a bit more that kind of mid-tone in the middle. So we've got a bit more light, white, light, and then mid in the sky. Gives a slightly better sense of the colour ranges. And looking at it, maybe I don't want quite so much of the mid colour up at the top of the sky. I want a little bit more white. So when you look at it in colour, again, that'll help to give you a slightly different perspective. But again, it's all fundamentally about trying to simplify this down to interesting shapes. So once you get the thumbnail to a point that you're happy with, we can move on and we can potentially do some more. Before we do that, it might be quite a good idea to save that particular composition image. Now there's no button to be able to do that within the interface, but what you can do is if you use something like the Windows snipping tool, if you bring that in and then do new to get a new snip, then what you can do is come in and clip that reference image that you've created, or the part of the reference image that you've created. That should now hopefully be on the clipboard, and we should now be able to do paste. And what we've now got is another image that is now just that cropped composition. So as we go through this, we can build up these separate thumbnails that we're creating, because remember this image here is much bigger, and if we move it around and start doing other things, it might be hard to get back to that exact composition that we used for this. So by snipping and pasting these reference images as we go through, what we've then got is we can build up a set of reference images that will reflect the thumbnails that we create as we go forward. So we're going to move on and do another thumbnail. So what I've prepared is a different selection of this image. It's a little bit more of a square format, and we're going to go through the same process. So I've positioned it so it's going to line up neatly on my page. What I'm going to do is go to my lines layer. We'll go back to the pencil, and the first thing that we'll do is to draw in the bounding box for this. So same principle again, we'll just draw in the straight lines. I'll just take the ones that were there originally and just extend those down. And that gives us the lines for that reference image. So one of the things with these is it's generally better to work smaller rather than larger. I'm doing them probably slightly bigger just to help you try and see what I'm doing in terms of the painting, but ultimately, you know, these thumbnails should be very small statements to help you understand the composition. So we're going to do the same principle. We'll go down to the shapes, stay in the lines layer. We'll get the selection. We'll select that area. We'll go to the fill tool. We'll go down to the shapes layer, pick the mid color and fill that in. And we can use the same thumbnail layer, or we can create another new layer. For just now, I'll just use the same one. So that's going to be clipped to that shape. We can do without the selection, so I'll go back to select and take that away. And that now allows us to paint within this new shape. So same principle as before, we're just going to work through and we'll do black, white, light, dark, and then work around the image to refine it. So you can see in this one, I've deliberately chosen quite a high horizon line, probably even above the sort of 1/3 mark, just to really kind of push it. So we've got foreground, and a lot of that interest is going to be in the shapes and the field and all these straw bales in the distance. You may find, even though you have this image in grayscale, actually just squinting at it and trying to simplify it that way may potentially be helpful as well. Same principle as before, we overpaint some of the shapes and then we can carve back into them to get slightly smaller and more refined shapes out of them. The same principles as before, you're not constrained by the reference image. Again, looking at this composition, I'm starting to see that there's too much similarity in these trees. So there's a couple of options. One option might be just to take that one out. One might be to make this one just a little bit bigger, so we've got the 3 on the side. One option might be to maybe move one of these trees over a bit so it's not quite as close to the edge, that sort of thing. So again, use this image as your starting point, but don't be constrained by it. Part of the opportunity here is to be able to design your composition. Experiment, see what works, try things out, and move stuff around, see if you can find a better composition. And the same as before, once you get far enough into it that you start to have your basic statement there, pop the grayscale off and then just look at the image in colour and see if that now feels different in terms of whether there's shapes and tones that you maybe want to exaggerate things that maybe feel a bit lighter that you want to try and highlight. So for example, maybe feel like there's a bit more of a sense of light on the field in the distance there that I want to bring out, that sort of thing. And then maybe a bit more brightness in some of these clouds. So switching to colour just helps you see the image slightly differently. Same as before, these three trees are all very sort of similar, so it might be tempted just to slightly emphasise one of those, make it slightly bigger, and then just very slightly knock another one down. So this all really comes to your personal interpretation of the image and what you want to try and say with it. So that gives us a couple of thumbnails. What I'm going to do is just carry on and just see if I can find any more interesting compositions out of this photo. So there we have the final finished set of thumbnails. And they all came from the original single photograph that we started with. So we took that photo and then we looked at coming up with lots of different compositions. So cropping it to different shapes, different aspect ratios, zooming in. And as I went through and created the thumbnails, what I did was save each one of those into the reference panel. So now I've got a thumbnail drawing and all these references, so I could come back and start to work on these more if I wanted to take that to a finished painting. So I hope that's been helpful and interesting. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Please consider giving me a like. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to the channel. That would be very much appreciated. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.